Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Kane Ashby no way intended for it to end this way, but the moment his hand connected with Phyllis Summers' face, the sound echoed louder than any concession ever could. The poke wasn't just physical, it was final, brutal, and emblematic of everything that had gone wrong between them. In that moment, their secret alliance shattered, and the verity they'd buried beneath ambition and desire came screaming to the face. Phyllis staggered back, shock etched across her face, not just from the pain but from the consummation that Kane, her mate, her co-conspirator, her guard, had just turned on her. What neither of them realized was that they were no longer alone. Billy Abbott stood frozen just outside the room, having eavesdropped everything. And with one ruinous disclosure, the balance of power in Genoa City shifted ever. It had all started weeks before, when Phyllis and Kane began still conniving against Newman Enterprises. What began as collective resentment toward Victor Newman evolved into commodity darker, more advised. Kane, still reeling from times of feeling sidelined, dismissed, and undervalued by the nobility of Genoa City, saw Newman Enterprises as the ultimate symbol of everything that had held him back. Phyllis, meanwhile, was driven by a deeper, more particular rage. Victor had lowered her, used her, discarded her like a pawn. Together, they induced themselves they were ant-villains. They were revolutionaries. They told each other they were taking down a dictator. But nearly along the way, the lines blurred, and the plan came lower about justice and further about power. Their scheme was intricate, dangerous, and ruthless. Phyllis used her connections, her capability to manipulate information, to blunder internal Newman data through a shadow network of shell companies. Kane handled the fiscal pushes, moving plutocrat, setting traps, creating the vision of insecurity within Newman Enterprises. They rumored strategy in dark corners, changed enciphered dispatches, and celebrated small palms in secret. Every crack in Victor's conglomerate felt like a particular triumph. And for a while, it worked. Stock prices wavered. Directors shocked. Victor grew suspicious. But dubitation wasn't proof, and that's where the real peril lay. Kane was the first to feel the pressure. Victor's people were circling near, asking questions, tracing fiscal trails that Kane had allowed were untraceable. Sleepless nights came routine. Paranoia set in. Kane started to wonder whether Phyllis had been as careful as she claimed, or whether she'd been playing her own game all along. Every time she assured him everything was under control, her smile felt sharper, more advised. Mistrustfulness crept by, poisoning what little trust remained between them. Kane began to realize commodity intimidating. If this plan collapsed, someone would need to take the fall. And Phyllis Summers wasn't the type to immolate herself. Phyllis, on the other hand, tasted Kane pulling down, and it rankled her. She had done the dirty work. She had taken the pitfalls. And now, when Palm was within reach, Kane was getting cold bases. She pushed harder, demanding fidelity, reminding him of everything they'd done together. But Phyllis made a fatal mistake. She undervalued Kane's despair. When she casually mentioned a backup plan involving an anonymous goat, Kane realized with nipping clarity that she had formerly chosen him. The battle came late at night, inside a private office they'd been using as a meeting place. Voices rose. Allegations flew. Phyllis denied everything, of course, she always did. She spun the story, twisted the narrative, tried to recapture control. But Kane had formally uncovered the verity. He'd proof, dispatches, fiscal logs, contingency emails Phyllis no way meant for him to see. She hadn't just planned for his downfall. She had finagled it. The treason cut deeper than any business loss ever could. That's when Kane snapped. The poke was sudden, violent, fueled by rage and emotion. Phyllis heaved, clinging her impertinence, her eyes wide with unbelief. For the first time in a long time, Phyllis Summers was speechless. Kane's voice shook as he told her she had destroyed everything, any trust, any alliance, any chance of survival. He indicted her of using him, of setting him up from the veritably morning. Phyllis tried to recover, tried to turn the tables, but the damage was done. Kane had crossed a line he could no way uncross. What neither of them noticed was Billy Abbott standing just outside the door. Billy hadn't meant to eavesdrop anything. He'd followed a hunch, tracking suspicious exertion tied to Newman Enterprises. When he heard Phyllis's voice, he stopped. When he heard Kane's, he heeded. And when he heard the full compass of their plot, the fiscal sabotage, the manipulation, the plan to cripple Victor Newman's conglomerate, Billy realized he was witnessing commodity far bigger than a petty scheme. This was war. And Phyllis was at the center of it. Billy's heart pounded as he absorbed every word. He heard Kane charge Phyllis of framing him. He heard Phyllis hang him right back, advising that if he went down, she'd make sure he was end alone. And also came the poke. Billy squinched at the sound, knowing he'd just crossed into a moment that would change everything. He backed down quietly, his mind racing. He now held the key to destroying Phyllis, or using this information for his own wind-up. Inside the room, the fate was just as explosive. Phyllis's fury erupted. She lashed out verbally, calling Kane weak, pathetic, unable of seeing the bigger picture. She told him Newman Enterprises merited to burn, that Victor merited everything coming to him. Kane, shaken but resolute, fired back that he would go down for her ambition. He made it clear he was done guarding her. However, Kane was ready to tell the verity, if Victor came knocking. That's when fear flitted across Phyllis's face. For all her bravado, Phyllis knew what Kane's treason meant. However, everything unraveled if Kane turned on her. Her precisely constructed web would collapse. Her character, formerly fragile, would be cancelled. And worse, Victor Newman would come for her with a revenge. Phyllis tried to backpedal, to soften her tone, to salvage the alliance. But Kane was once listening. He walked out, leaving Phyllis alone with the remains of her own timber. Billy didn't desolate time. He knew this information was a ticking lemon. The question wasn't whether to use it but how. Turning Phyllis in outright would earn him points with Victor, but it would also put Billy back under Newman control, commodity he despised. Holding on to the secret gave him influence, power he hadn't had in times. And for formerly, Billy liked being the one in control. Meanwhile, Kane made a reckless decision of his own. Rather of going straight to Victor, he began laying route to cover himself, still distancing himself from the fiscal mess, creating a narrative that painted him as a manipulated pawn. But every move he made only verified what Phyllis formerly stressed: Kane was preparing to immolate her to save himself. The walls began closing in presto. Victor tasted blood in the water. His investigators uncovered anomalies that refocused directly toward Phyllis. Old adversaries resurfaced, eager to see her fall. Tales spread through Genoa City: Phyllis Summers was in trouble. Big trouble. And when Billy eventually brazened her, the verity exploded. He told her he knew everything. He repeated her own words back to her, watched the color drain from her face. Phyllis tried to deny it, also tried to hang him, also tried to betray him into silence, but Billy wasn't buying it. He told her she'd eventually gone too far. Kane's treason had cracked the foundation, and Billy was ready to bring the whole thing down. As Phyllis stood there, cornered and exposed, one thing came sorrowfully clear: the secret that was meant to destroy Newman Enterprises was about to destroy her rather. Kane's poke had been the first blow. Billy's knowledge was the knockout punch. And with Victor Newman ending in, Phyllis Summers' reign of manipulation was eventually coming to an end. The treason was complete. The fallout ineluctable. And in Genoa City, nothing would ever be the same again. After Billy's battle, Phyllis slightly slept. Every shadow felt like Victor's, every unanswered call a warning. Genoa City had a way of turning on its own, and Phyllis Summers knew better than anyone how presto whispers could come clearances. Kane's treason replayed in her mind on an endless circle: the poke, the look in his eyes, the certainty that he was done shielding her. That single moment had exploded everything. For times, Phyllis had survived by staying three-way ahead. Now she was scrabbling just to keep her head above water. Meanwhile, Kane was unraveling in a different way. The rage that fueled his decision to turn on Phyllis gave way to commodity far more dangerous: fear. Every move he'd made against Newman Enterprises now felt like a neon sign pointing directly at him. He told himself he'd no choice, that Phyllis forced his hand, but deep down he knew the verity. He'd wanted the power. He'd wanted the palm. And now the price was coming due. Kane began still reaching out, to old connections, to legal counsels, to anyone who might help him construct a credible story. One where he was the victim. One where Phyllis Summers was the architect. But Kane undervalued just how important damage Phyllis could do when backed into a corner. She struck first. Phyllis blurted picky information, enough to muddy the waters, enough to make it look like Kane had gone guileful. Anonymous tips landed on the right divisions. Financial inconsistencies suddenly traced back to accounts Kane formerly controlled. It wasn't the full verity, but it didn't need to be. In Genoa City, perception was everything. And Kane's name began circulating in dangerous exchanges. When Kane realized what Phyllis had done, fear set in. She wasn't retreating. She was counterattacking. At Newman Enterprises, Victor tasted the shift incontinently. Times of warfare had honed his instincts, and commodity about the unforeseen chaos felt too deliberate to be coexistence. He ordered his platoon to widen the net. No more hypotheticals. No more favorites. However, he wanted every possible suspect exposed. Kane, Phyllis, if someone had targeted his company. Victor wasn't just looking for justice. He was looking for blood. Billy set up himself standing at the center of the storm. The influence he'd gained by eavesdropping Kane and Phyllis had grown heavier by the hour. What started as power now felt like a ticking time lemon in his fund. Sally advised him to be careful, reminding him that Victor Newman no way lost and that anyone caught in the crossfire infrequently walked down clean. But Billy wasn't ready to let go. For formerly, he'd information that could rewrite the board. And he intended to use it. So Billy made a move no bone. Saw coming. He brazened Kane. The meeting was tense, loaded with implied pitfalls. Billy didn't desolate time circling the verity, he laid it out plainly. He knew about the plot. He knew about Newman Enterprises. And he knew Kane had slighted Phyllis after discovering her plan to make him the Fall Joe. Kane set. In that moment, he understood just how exposed he really was. Billy wasn't just a substantiation, he was a wild card. Billy offered Kane a deal. Not protection. Not fidelity. Information, for information. Kane could help Billy take Phyllis down, and in return, Billy would decelerate Victor's quest just enough to give Kane a fighting chance. It was parlous. Dangerous. But Kane was running out of options. With no real druthers left, he agreed. What Kane didn't realize was that Billy had no intention of letting him walk down unscathed. Phyllis, meanwhile, was playing her own wind-up. She arranged a private meeting with Victor Newman, completely apprehensive it could be her last chance to survive. She didn't come in ordnance blazing. She came in controlled, calculated, and wounded. She told Victor she had been manipulated. That Kane had used her access, her once connections, to get close to Newman Enterprises. She claimed she'd tried to stop him. That the poke wasn't rage, it was guilt. Victor heeded without expression. Phyllis could no way tell whether that silence worked in her favor or sealed her fate. Victor eventually spoke, his voice cold wave, precise. He told Phyllis that treason always leaves a trail, and that hers was insolvable to ignore. He didn't charge her outright. He didn't hang her. He simply told her that the verity always comes out. And when it does, there are consequences. Phyllis left the meeting shaken. She knew she had induced him. Worse, she suspected Victor was formerly 3 moves ahead. The trap snapped shut days laterally. Billy blurted the final piece of substantiation, recordings Kane had participated, dispatches that proved Phyllis had orchestrated the sabotage of Newman Enterprises while planning Kane's downfall. Victor's investigators connected the blotches with ruthless effectiveness. Clearances were prepared. Abettors dissolved overnight. Phyllis's phone stopped ringing. When security showed up, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No escape. Just the quiet, ruinous consummation that the game was over. Kane watched from a distance as Phyllis was taken in for questioning. Relief swamped him, snappily followed by dread. He'd won. But at what cost? Victor hadn't cleared him. He hadn't forgiven him. Kane was still under scrutiny, still vulnerable. He'd traded one adversary for another far more dangerous one. Billy, standing with Sally, felt no triumph. Just prostration. He'd exposed the verity, but Genoa City did end award icons. It penalized survivors. And he knew Victor wouldn't forget his part in all of this. As for Phyllis, sitting alone in an interrogation room, the weight of it all eventually crashed down. Kane's poke had been the morning, but this was the end. Her secrets were no longer hers to control. Her alliances had turned to ash. The conglomerate she tried to destroy still stood, while her own world lay in remains. And in Genoa City, the assignment was formally again sorrowfully clear. Betray Newman Enterprises, and the consequences will destroy you ever. The fallout from that night didn't unfold. Still, it exploded across Genoa City like a controlled explosion gone wrong. By morning, Kane Ashby was formally lamenting the poke, not because he felt sympathy for Phyllis Summers, but because he knew exactly what it represented. There was no going back. He'd crossed the final line, disassociated the last thread tying him to their secret war against Newman Enterprises. And worse, he'd exposed fear, his own. Phyllis had seen it in his eyes, and Phyllis Summers no way forgot weakness. Not ever. Phyllis, meanwhile, goggled at her reflection long after Kane stormed out. The faint greenishness on her impertinence would fade, but the damage beneath it was endless. The poke replayed in her mind, over and over, each time morphing into commodity worse, not just treason, but demotion. Kane hadn't just turned on her, he'd rejected her control. And that was insupportable. She didn't cry. She didn't fear. She recalculated. Phyllis Summers had survived worse than this, and she refused to let Kane Ashby be the bone who destroyed her. But indeed, as she colluded her coming move, a far more dangerous problem lurked in the murk: Billy Abbott. Billy didn't sleep that night. He paced, replaying every word he'd eavesdropped, every indicting detail that proved Kane and Phyllis weren't just dabbling in commercial sabotage, they were orchestrating a full-scale takedown of Newman Enterprises. This wasn't gossip or enterprise. This was felonious. And Billy knew commodity differently too. If Victor Newman set up out before he decided how to play this, Billy could fluently come contributory damage. Information was power, but only if applied at the right moment. By the time the sun rose, Billy had made up his mind he wouldn't rush to Victor. Not yet. He wanted answers. He wanted influence. And utmost of all, he wanted to look Phyllis Summers in the eye and watch her realize the game was over. Kane spent the coming many days walking on glass. Every phone call felt like a trouble. Every knock at the door made his heart race. Victor Newman's silence was nearly worse than battle. Kane knew Victor well enough to understand that when Victor went quiet, he was gathering munitions. Kane tried to isolate himself, reaching out to old connections, planting subtle seeds that suggested he'd been manipulated. He framed himself as an unwitting party, a man pulled into a plan by someone far more cunning and ruthless. Phyllis. The irony wasn't lost on him. But Phyllis wasn't sitting still. She realized snappily that Kane wasn't just distancing himself, he was laboriously preparing to hand her over. Rage coddled beneath her calm surface as she actuated her own contingency plans. Shell accounts shifted. Lines dissolved. Dispatches were deleted or altered. She indeed began laying root to suggest that Kane had acted singly, driven by resentment and greed. However, she'd make sure he wasn't the idol, if he wanted to make her the villain. And also Billy struck. He possessed Phyllis in a way only Billy Abbott could: casual, disarming, deadly. He didn't charge her right down. Rather, he asked questions, vague but pointed, watching her responses nearly. Phyllis tried to play dumb, tried to charm him, but the pressure was unmistakable. When Billy eventually told her he'd eavesdropped everything, the plot, the sabotage, Kane's fear, the poke, Phyllis felt commodity she hadn't felt in times. Real fear. She laughed it off at first, mocking Billy's imagination, but he shut her down presto. He quoted her word for word. He described details no bone differently could know. And just like that, Phyllis realized she was girdled by adversaries, one who'd formerly betrayed her and another who now held her fate in his hands. Billy gave her a choice.